Welcome to the second in the series of Sarasota County History Walks. The starting and ending location is at the northwest corner of Palm Avenue and Main Street. There is some free parking on Gulfstream Avenue and at the Marina parking lot. The Palm Avenue garage is also available, but I believe it is not free. The walk is fairly long, so I will not go into detail about every location. The walk along Lower Main Street alone would require about 2 hours or more if detailed history were presented on every building. Please wear comfortable shoes and bring water or other hydrating drink. I walk fast, so please try to keep up. This picture is one of the earliest of the Sarasota community. The lower left building is at our starting point, it being the Hamlin, Whitaker, and Smith livery stables. While we have this picture up, let's identify the buildings on the left side of Main Street. After the livery is Dr. Robert Wallace's home, clinic, and pharmacy. He arrived with a Scott colony and stayed long enough to make sure yellow fever didn't get a hold in Sarasota. The next house was built by John Iverson. Although he didn't live in Sarasota for a long time, he kept his properties and built some buildings that are still used today. The next two buildings were built by Alfred Grable from Lakeland. The first was occupied by the widow Mrs. William Bartholomew and her children. The other Grable building was not occupied for a while and used for church services, dances, voting, and other community activities. The building at the end of Main was the Sarasota House, a boarding house run by Joe Vincent and family. The two-story building partially shown on the right was the Whitaker General Store, which housed the post office for a period of time. Things to notice. The community required a wooden sidewalk in front of the northwest side of Main Street. We will talk more about Lower Main Street at the end of our walk. From Alex Browning's autobiography, when the front part of the livery stable was converted into a pool room with an old pool table and cues, the girls would come down at night and watch us play by the light of the kerosene lamps, each boy taking special delight in teaching his best girl how to hold a cue and pocket the balls. At the time this was going on, my brother Hugh shot an alligator from the rowboat close to the wharf and secured it before it sank, hauled it ashore, and up the plank sidewalk, placing it across the outside door of the pool room in the dark. When the girls came out, there was some squealing and confusion as they stepped on the dead gator. The old folks did not like this joke, and the girls never came back at night. By 1894, the livery grew a second story and the inn was opened. At the same time, Elijah Grantham and Dave Broadway opened a store on the first floor selling groceries, corn, oats, hay, dry goods, clothing, and novelties. The picture of May 16, 1894, on the left shows members of the First Baptist Convention in Sarasota on the second floor and Grantham and friends on the first floor. The picture on the right shows the Palm and Main fountain and free roaming cattle getting a drink. Behind the cattle was the Bay Villa Hotel and the Madison Real Estate Office. Mrs. Harriet Hart was one of many proprietors of the Bay Villa. The building housed McFarland's Tin Shop before 1920, and in 1920 W.F. Prentice, who previously worked for Mrs. Bertha Palmer and managed the Hotel Watrous, opened the Prentice House here along with a restaurant and a bakery. The bottom picture shows the building of the first skyscraper finished in Sarasota, the Sarasota Hotel. The Sarasota Hotel was started in April 1924 and finished in 1925. It was the second skyscraper started in Sarasota behind J.H. Lord's Bank Building and was the first one finished. It was built by W.H. Pipcorn of Milwaukee for an estimated $250,000. It was sold to Leroy Fenn in 1944 for $100,000 which was the largest real estate transaction since before the Depression. In the late 1960s, it fell into disrepair, the tourists preferring beach hotels. It was vacated and stayed empty from 1971 to 1974. Carl Shapiro bought it for $160,000 in 1974 and converted it into executive offices, the main Palm Plaza, and later named the Palm Tower. Time to start walking up North Palm Avenue. Swerve around these tables and chairs. We are going to stop at the alley ahead. Here is an interesting story from the Story of Sarasota about this very alley. It was Dr. Halton who first denounced the outdoor privies and inadequate cesspools in the business district. Appearing before council soon after he opened his first office in Sarasota, he asserted that the town's lack of sewers was a disgrace to the community. To emphasize this point, he said the stench from the cesspool at the Bellhaven Inn, the town's deluxe hotel, was so nauseating he had been unable to finish eating a meal in the hotel's dining room. The first sewer in town was built by J.H. Lord after people began complaining about the stench from the cesspool at the Sarasota House, which Lord owned at the time. 6-inch pipes were laid in the alley just north of Main Street from the hotel to the bay. Merchants on the north side of Main were permitted to tap into the sewer by paying a small rental fee. But the Sarasota Times gave a twist to this story. In June of 1910, a petition from residents living near the Halton Hotel, which was run by Dr. Jack Halton, was presented in which they asked that steps be taken to correct the unsanitary condition of affairs in the rear of said hotel, and on motion of Heigl, seconded by Mr. Bryan, the matter was referred to the street committee with instructions to act in the premises. 2 weeks later, Mr. Owen Burns, as owner, stated that the sewers would not be used now for some time, and before they were used again, same would be remedied. The Palm Avenue Garage, nicknamed by some the Wind Sail Garage, opened for business December 31st, 2010. The cost was $12 million and was designed by Jonathan Parks Architects of Sarasota. We are walking to the garage's elevators. You have a choice to meet us at the top floor. You can take the elevator, my recommendation, or take the stairs. Good. You chose the elevator. Get in and we'll ride to the top floor. The Vertical Art Museum was completed by November 2011. On the 6th floor, the roof, there's a theater theme, Players Theater, painted by Skip Dydra of Sarasota. The garage has another stairwell on the diagonal side of the garage near the alley. There is some artwork there, but not to the extent of the stairwell near the elevator. The Public Art Fund paid $25,000 for the art project. There is a special coating over the artwork which aids in the removal of any graffiti. At the time, Mayor Suzanne Atwell stated, "It's a true representation of what this community values so highly, which are art and culture." Note, this garage is owned by the City of Sarasota. Their policy about the general public walking through the garage to see the artwork may change in the future. Make sure you view the side of the elevator section and the side and back of the stairwell on all levels. The fifth floor has an opera theme, Sarasota Opera House and Scenes, painted by Marco Bell and Monica Spain of Sarasota. On the fourth floor, there's a music theme, Downtown Music Scene, painted by Chor Boogie of California. On the third floor, there's a film theme, Sarasota Film Festival, painted by French artist MTO. On the second floor, there is a dance theme, Sarasota Ballet, painted by Eduardo Cobra of Brazil. Beautiful. That was the end of our vertical art gallery. Please watch your step as we descend to the street level. We are going to make a right turn at the sidewalk. We are turning this way. No, it's not time for a break. We're going to cross the alley. Be careful crossing the alley. This is the entrance and exit for the Palm Avenue garage. We're walking to the entrance of this grand hotel. Welcome to the Marriott's Art Ovation Hotel. Marriott's Art Ovation Hotel is built at Palm Avenue and Coconut Avenue. In early Sarasota, there was a Coconut Avenue, but not here. It was called Park Street. The building on this corner in 1911 was built by Judge Richard P. McDaniel to be close to his daughter, Mrs. Blanche Gillespie, who had just built a home at Gulfstream Avenue and Park Street. He built a 14-room house costing over $4,000 and moved in February 1912. Unfortunately, the Gillespies built another house closer to the golf course and then moved to Scotland during World War I. McDaniel had health issues and eventually moved out of his Palm Avenue house and moved into Gillespie's house near the golf course. He died in September of 1913. Before he died, his Palm Avenue home was sold to Miss Lillian V. Smith of Bartow in March of 1913, who intended on opening a private boarding house. It was resold a year later. Restwood Hall Tourist Home, managed by Mrs. C. Boardman, lasted for many years, at least to the start of World War II. The daughter of Mrs. Boardman, Hazel Curry, as seen in the photo, took part in a fashion show at the Miramar Hotel. J. Hamilton Gillespie and wife, Blanche, rented a house near Park and Gulfstream from Owen Burns, and while living there, built the third Gillespie house in Sarasota. They had sold the Morrell Street house to Burns in 1910 and traveled back to Scotland for a while. However, before the house was completely ready, he took another trip to Scotland and was gone for over 8 months. By the time he got back, he moved in with McDaniels and was more interested in living near his 9-hole golf course and started making plans for a 2-story bungalow in December 1912. Now, the Bay Plaza Condominiums resides on the corner of Coconut and Gulfstream Avenues. Back to our walk. Before crossing the street to the Florida Studio Theater, we noticed the new artwork in the middle of the roundabout. The art, Jumping Fish, was sculpted by Jeff Larimore in 2019. We'll cross the roundabout at Coconut and visit the Woman's Club building, now the home of FST, or Florida Studio Theater. As we get closer to the Woman's Club, we see another statue, the Butterfly Lady. In years past, before the roundabout and the building of the Art Ovation Hotel, the Butterfly Lady was located next to the intersection of Palm and Coconut. I'm glad to see they restored her to this area. The Butterfly Lady, sculptor August Moreau, donated to the Theater and Arts District by Paul Passerat and Jack Wise, November 2000. Just after the incorporation of the town of Sarasota, the ladies wanted a say in the town's improvements. When the town fathers would turn down their request because of no money, they would do fundraisers and get permission to make changes with their own money. In 1903, the ladies formed the Town Improvement Society. Besides getting sidewalks on both sides of Main Street, hard surface on Main Street, and sidewalks next to the Methodist Church, they formed the first library in 1907 in the Gillespie block at 5 Points, run by Miss Sarah Young, and took responsibility in cleaning up Rosemary Cemetery. From 1907 to 1912, the society became inactive except for Miss Young and the library. When she became ill and could not operate the library anymore, it caused other women to form the Woman's Club. In 1913, the Woman's Club took over care of the library in the Gillespie building. In 1914, they initiated a census and started registering births. In 1915, they built this building, one of the few Tudor structures built in Sarasota, where they met, organized classes, and had dances and celebrations and other events. They moved the library into this building and maintained it until 1940. The Women's Club moved out in 1979, and about a year later, the FST, or Florida Studio Theater, moved in. The FST has expanded greatly since that time, and we will see examples of that on this walk. On January 1st of 1916, the Women's Club laid the cornerstone of their building. Behind it, they put a time capsule, a box containing the 1914 and 1915 Women's Club yearbooks, the Women's Club issue of the Sarasota Sun, whose editor was Rube Allen, the April 30th, 1914 issue of the Sarasota Times containing the Women's Club annual report, the December 30th, 1915 issue of the Sarasota Times, the Women's Club stationery with officer names and signatures, a picture of the Colonial Tea, a postcard of Park Day, 1 Buffalo nickel and 2 Lincoln pennies, cards from the members. The plaque near the cornerstone reads, Women's Club of Sarasota, built 1915, architect H.N. Hall, designated a historical structure by the city of Sarasota, Florida. We'll continue our walk up North Palm Avenue. And we walk by an edition of the Florida Studio Theater, the Goldstein Cabaret. As we continue walking, we see the first glimpse of the Francis-Carlton Apartments. You can see from the historic plaque that Carlton Teat had the Francis-Carlton Apartments built in 1924 by Carmen Construction. George McAlpin's nephew, Carlton Olin Teat, from Atlanta, Georgia, came to Sarasota to help develop, advertise, and sell Dr. F.W. Schultz's Cayo Costa property. He and his family stayed in Sarasota. Carlton, for at least the next 12 years, developed his real estate and insurance businesses. In 1917, he was a notary public and a justice of the peace for the Sarasota area. In 1922, his son Carlton Jr. married and moved to Jacksonville, Florida with a traveling salesman job. In May of 1924, Carlton announced he was building new apartments just west of the Woman's Club on North Palm Avenue using a Tampa architect, Francis James, who coordinated with a Sarasota architect, Alex Browning. C.O. Teat noted he would call the complex the Francis Apartments after his wife. The construction was to be done by Carmen Construction, the same company that built the Miramar Apartments and Hotel. By 1925, it was finished and the name changed to the Francis-Carlton Apartments. Some say that he included his son's name, which may be true, but his name was also Carlton. In 1924, the Mediterranean Revival-style apartments had an unobstructed view of Sarasota Bay. The complex was 4 separate buildings connected by stairwells. It had 21 complete apartments of 4 to 6 rooms respectively. It had icebox openings on the exterior of the kitchen so ice could be delivered from the hallway, garbage receptacles, and a roof garden. In 1952, it became Florida's first cooperative. A typical setup would be an entrance hall and dining nook, living room with adjoining dressing room, bedroom, sun porch, or guest room, and bath with tub and shower at $8,000 per unit. Today, it is managed as a condominium complex. Let's continue our tour. I know the Francis-Carlton is beautiful, but watch where you're walking. The sidewalk curves toward the street. Just a few steps more. We are now approaching the previous De Canizares home. Chateau Petit, the wood frame house in the upper picture, was located on South Palm Avenue and was built around 1910. In 1923, Fred A. De Canizares bought a lot on North Palm Avenue from Owen Burns Realty, as well as the wooden structure on South Palm, and had it moved to his lot in 1924. He had the architect Thomas Reed Martin transform Chateau Petit with a Mediterranean Revival slipcover design using hollow clay tile and stucco to achieve the desired results. The De Canizares called their house Chateau Chica. About 1980, it was modified for use as an office. Mr. and Mrs. Frederick A. De Canizares were Sarasota snowbirds from Wayne, Pennsylvania since before 1910. From 1910 to 1920, they stayed at the Belhaven Inn. Fred had a good tenor voice and often participated in musicales put on at the Belhaven Inn and Woman's Club offerings. Mrs. De Canizares was involved with the Woman's Club and Sarasota Society. From 1920 to 1924, they spent their winters at the Prentice House on the corner of Main Street and Palm Avenue. Frederick liked to fish and honored himself with 2 fishing records. In January 1921, he caught the largest redfish, 19 pounds, for the season, and later in the year, he caught the latest tarpon ever caught in Sarasota area on September 15th. During the winter months, they enrolled their daughter in Sarasota's out-of-door school, popular at the time. This is a picture of Harriet Sturgis and Mrs. Fred De Canizares in May 1945. A last look at the De Canizares house, Chateau Chica. Let's look across the street at the parking garage for One Sarasota Tower, the mirror window skyscraper at the corner of North Tamiami Trail and John Ringling Causeway. In 1907, this was the site of the second block building in Sarasota built by J. Lewis Huell, J. H. Gillespie's building, the Gillespie Sanitarium. In 1908, Gillespie offered the building and grounds for lease to Dr. Jack Halton, who had his own sanitarium, albeit small, in Bradenton. Dr. Halton knew from prior experience that he couldn't get enough business from a sanitarium in Sarasota to make the lease worthwhile, so he converted the sanitarium into a hotel with a few rooms reserved for his practice. In 1910, Bertha Palmer and family tried to make reservations at the Belhaven Inn, but the inn did not have enough rooms with bathrooms for her party, and the reservations were moved to the Halton. Jack Halton was a great host and entertainer, and the Palmers enjoyed their stay. Later in 1910, J.H. Gillespie, in a surprising move, sold all his Sarasota holdings to Owen Burns, which included the Halton. Dr. Halton was vacated by the end of the year and leased the Belhaven Inn. The Halton was turned into the Burns Villa, the home of Owen Burns and family. Owen Burns died in 1937, and his wife Vernona sold the building and lot in 1939, and it was converted to the Admiral Motel. It was razed in 1961 to make room for a bank. Continuing our walk. We are approaching the old Reagan House, now the Casantica Italian restaurant. L.D. Reagan came to Sarasota in 1924 from Tampa, where he was the business manager for the Tampa Times. He bought the Sarasota Times, located at Upper Main Street and Lemon Avenue, on March 27, 1924, from T.J. Campbell and J.H. Lord. He owned the Sarasota Times until it went into receivership in December of 1929. In 1933, he became the postmaster of Sarasota and retired from that job because of ill health in 1945. He purchased this lot on Palm Avenue from the Burns Realty Company in April of 1925. He had Thomas Reed Martin design a Mediterranean revival house for his private residence, and he moved in by 1926. The building has had many uses since that time. As seen above, for a time it was used as a real estate office and later occupied by a series of restaurants. The restaurants I know about that occupied this building are Zach's Restaurant, pictured above with a Z welded into the gate, Zach's State House, which closed in 2012, Aria European Restaurant, Zwiebel's Restaurant, which is German slang for onion, and now Casantica Italian Restaurant. Time to hit the sidewalk. We're approaching North Tamiami Trail and turning the corner, and walk to First Street, which used to be 7th Street. We are at the corner of Tamiami and First Street. If we look across the street at the corner entrance to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, this is the area where Owen Burns Real Estate Building and the El Vernona Hotel stood. Owen Burns built a Mediterranean revival-styled building designed by Dwight James Baum on 7th Street and Banana Avenue, later called Broadway Avenue, and today North Tamiami Trail. Home of the Burns Real Estate Company, Burns conducted most of his business here from 1925 to 1929. In 1935, Carl Bickle, newly retired from United Press, bought it for his Sarasota home with his wife Madeira. It was known as the Bickle House for many years. Owen Burns had wanted to build a hotel for many years. In 1926, he built a grand hotel designed by Dwight James Baum to resemble a Moorish castle for an estimated $800,000. He named it after his wife Vernona as the El Vernona Hotel. The land boom in Florida had turned to bust, and soon thereafter, Owen's dreams went bust. Starting with a hotel manager recommended by John Ringling, who left and reneged on a $50,000 a year lease, leaving no one to run the hotel, to having it foreclosed by the Prudence Bond Company, run by John Ringling's friend, Sam Gumpertz, to have John Ringling buy it for pennies on the dollar. Ringling immediately changed the name to the El Verano Hotel and then to the John Ringling Hotel. In 1964, the hotel changed to apartments, and the name was changed to the John Ringling Towers. By 1980, the building was vacant, and although it was added to the U.S. National Register of Historic Places in March of 1987, it was razed in 1998, along with the Bickle House, to make room for the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Here's a view of the North Palm and Owen Burns Realty building next to the El Vernona Hotel. Note the Woman's Club, Francis-Carlton, Decanizares, and Reagan houses. To the upper right, the lone building was the El Vernona Apartments. Now let's walk eastward along 1st Street, previously 7th Street. We are approaching the Sarasota Times building. Here's a side view of the Sarasota Times building. L.D. Regan bought this lot on 7th Street, now 1st Street, from Burns Real Estate Company in 1925 and had Dwight James Baum design the Mediterranean Revival style 3-story building and Owen Burns build it in 1926. Please don't be confused about the 1899 above the doorway. The 1899 stands for the date CVS and Rose Wilson started the Sarasota Times in the old Iverson House on Lower Main Street. This is actually the 4th building to house the Sarasota Times. Rose Wilson sold the Sarasota Times in 1923 to T.J. Campbell and J.H. Lord, who in turn sold the newspaper on March 27, 1924 to L.D. Regan. In May of 1926, Regan moved the Times from his old home at Upper Main Street and Lemon to this building. In 1929, at the onset of the Depression, the Sarasota Times newspaper went into receivership. The Times building was subsequently used as the office of the Tree Ripe Citrus Guava Preserving Company, which was owned and operated by Owen Burns. Through the years, the building has held a few art studios until recently Ceviche occupied the building. Now it is the Sage restaurant, which focuses on global cuisine. Note the Reagan residence behind the Sarasota Times building in this picture. As we walk eastward on 1st Street, look over to your right. Yes, that pretty pink building is the Francis-Carlton Apartments, as good looking from the backside as it is from the front. Let's continue. A little bit further. What's this? A beautiful maiden watching us as we walk by? This is actually a mural on the FST Goldstein Cabaret building at the end of a small FST parking lot. If you look across the street, you will see the part of the building that was built in the 1920s, now the Gompertz Theater. This building opened as the Park 7th Movie House in the 1920s. People today are mystified at that name, but the corner streets in the 1920s were Park Avenue, now Coconut Avenue, and 7th Street, now 1st Street, thus Park and 7th. In the early 1930s, the building was vacant, but in 1934, it was opened as the Garden Theater. In 1941, it opened as the Art Theater, then closed. In 1949, it opened shortly as a movie house. In the 1950s, the Palm Tree Playhouse moved in, managed by Stuart Lancaster, the grandson of Charles and Edith Ringling. It closed in 1962. In the mid-1970s, it opened as the Asolo Stage 2 Theater, later becoming the home to the Theater Works. In 2002, Florida Studio Theater bought the building and changed its name to the Gompertz Theater after Mrs. Leila Gompertz, a large contributor. The Gompertz opened its doors for FST's 30th anniversary in 2004. In 2012, the FST broke ground for the Gompertz addition, the Hegner Theater Wing. In 2013, the John C. Court Cabaret opened in the new addition. We still have some walking to do. Be careful crossing Coconut Avenue. As we cross the street, notice the pink building on the other side of First Street and the apartments behind that building. The pink Mediterranean Revival building, erected in 1926, is called the Warren Building, as you can read on its facade. Clark Warren used this building as his real estate office in the late 1920s. His house was located where the apartments you saw earlier are. Here is a Clark Warren ad from the Sarasota Times dated September 2, 1925. Time to move on. Across First Street is the Bijou Garden Cafe, which opens its doors on November 16, 2021, after being purchased in 2020 by the team behind the Sage restaurant we saw earlier. The building was closed for renovation for 3 months before the grand opening. It still offers the best loved dishes from the Bijou, but has added more vegetarian and vegan dishes. In the 1920s, this lot held a Texaco gas station. A Texaco ad in the late 30s advertised, "Let us Marfac your car." In the 1970s, the gas station was converted into an artist studio. In 1986, it was renovated into a popular cafe. Chef Jean-Pierre and Chenag's served continental American food. Continuing, a few more steps. This building was built in 1925 by Ignatius R. Burns, brother of Owen Burns, and H. Bell as an office building in Realtors Row at the height of the Florida land boom. From the 1920s, the building housed a variety of businesses, professional offices, and city departments. In the 1980s through today, it has housed restaurants and bars. Monroe's Restaurant circa 1980s, Limerick Junction Pub mid-1990s, DJs, etc. The last time I visited the inside of the building, it had murals of Sarasota in the 1920s in the upper chamber. The Opera House straight ahead. Here we are at the corner of the Sarasota Opera building, where the Sarasota County plaque and the Opera Imp reside. The Opera Imp was sculpted by Athelia Patmagrian and presented to the Sarasota Opera in 1991. Arthur B. Edwards, the first mayor of the city of Sarasota, built the Edwards Theater in 1926, designed to accommodate vaudeville, silent movies, and the opera, as well as ground-level storefronts, second-floor offices, and apartments on the third floor. The Mediterranean Revival-style building was designed by Roy A. Benjamin from Jacksonville and constructed by G. A. Miller Construction Company from Tampa. Acts like Will Rogers and the Ziegfeld Follies played here. In 1936, it became the Florida Theater, mainly used for movies and other events. The Florida Theater hosted the world premieres of Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth in January of 1952 and Toby Tyler in January of 1960. Elvis Presley sang here in 1956. The Florida Theater closed in 1973. In 1979, the Asolo Opera Guild came to an agreement with the Asolo Theater Group to share the Asolo Theater for the next 5 years. They had those 5 years to find and prepare a new home. At the time, the Opera Business Office was located on the second floor of the old Edwards Theater building, which was owned by a company that trained personnel for careers in radio. The theater space was not used, so they inspected the acoustics and structural integrity and found them sound. They bought the building in 1979 and for the next 5 years raised monies to make the building an outstanding opera house. As the improvements were taking place, the Asolo Opera sign was displayed. It opened in 1984 as the Sarasota Theater of the Arts and later changed the name to the Sarasota Opera House. Across the street, Selby Five Points Park started as a triangular lot surrounded by Pineapple Avenue, 7th Street, which is now 1st Street, and Mango Avenue, which is now Central Avenue. J.H. Lord purchased this lot from the FMIC for $800 in 1904. Lord built 3 two-story cottages on this lot along Mango Avenue, which he rented out. He and his family lived in one of these when he spent time in Sarasota. The site has been recommended several times throughout the years as a potential great downtown park. However, J.H. Lord got a deal he couldn't refuse. In 1924, he was offered $12,000 a year lease for 99 years for the triangle lot, with the rate going up to $14,000 a year in 5 years. The Gulf Realty Company of Jacksonville wanted to use the lot as a commercial hub, including a hotel, stores, and office buildings. The bus station and taxi cabs started here, and the lot was full of businesses within a short period of time. Lord's Arcade and the bank building were across the street. Turn forward the clock, and Sarasota Redevelopment Plan wanted to put a park here and a major library across 1st Street. By 1990, all existing structures on the lot were torn down, and the Selby Five Points Park was dedicated in January of 1991. Sarasota's first public library was located in the Chitsey Building in 1941 near the Municipal Auditorium off North Tamiami Trail. In 1976, the first Selby Library was built on the bayfront. In 1998, the Selby Library moved to this location across from Selby Five Points Park. We are passing the Jonas Camlet Library, which is a rental venue of the Sarasota Opera for business presentations. These storefronts are fairly recent and sit on a site that has a lot of history. This lot is close to the old Robert Greer's house, which housed the Sarasota Post Office in the early 1890s. In 1911 through 1912, Palmer Florida Company built a 2-story brick building for their new office on Pineapple Avenue. The Palmer Florida Company and the Sarasota Venice Company moved into the building in June 1912. In 1925, City Realty, Stevenson and Cameron Construction Company, and the Waite Development and Nursery Company occupied the building. By 1928, it was known as the Waite Building, home of Dryman Real Estate and the deluxe restaurant. The building was moved to Pine Place and Bamboo Lane in 1947, and a Morrison's cafeteria was built on the Pineapple lot. In 1971, the Bob and Roberta Turoff's Golden Apple Dinner Theater opened and stayed open for over 40 years. Its last years were turbulent, and they finally closed their doors in 2013. The building was remodeled, creating modern storefronts. Walking towards 5 Points. Five Points. In the early 1900s, 5 Points housed the Sarasota House, the Methodist Episcopal Church, Gillespie's Block Building, the Grable Building housing the George A. Cason store and later Harry Heigl store, and the Triangle lot owned by J.H. Lord. 5 Points is covered in detail in another presentation. We are turning the corner onto Lower Main Street and then crossing the street. Turn left just ahead. Here's the crosswalk. The first telephone was housed in a wood building on the corner of Main Street and Pineapple Avenue. In 1905, Gillespie built the first cement block building here. The Zenith building now stands in the same area. Turn right onto the sidewalk. If you look across the street, you will see the First Watch restaurant. The First Watch location housed the Grable building, which was used as a store for George A. Cason and then Harry Heigl. About 1904, J.H. Lord bought the lot and building and leased space for offices in the lower floor and apartments on the top floor. On March 8, 1915, a fire started in the cobbler shop in the Grable building and spread down Lower Main Street, enveloping the new Tonnelier building housing the Palms Hotel and Theater. The Iverson Block building stopped the fire, but from there to 5 Points, all the buildings were destroyed. In September 1921, the Cummer building was finished on this corner, housing P.H. Levy's New York store and later still the sports shop owned by the Levinson family. Walking further down Lower Main. Right about here, next to the Gillespie Block building in March 1911, Owen Burns opened the first locally owned bank, the Citizens Bank, competing with the Bank of Sarasota led by Tampa bankers. It became the first national bank in 1913 under James E. Moore. In the 1920s, it hosted a real estate office and the Turner Company. Across the street was the location of the second Grable building. Susanna Bartholomew and her 3 children, in 1886, lived in the second Grable building. William Bartholomew, a Kansas City attorney and member of the Sarasota Vigilantes, fell from a tree in Mayaca while trying to hunt egrets for their feathers and broke his back. He died several weeks later. Susanna finished out the homestead and moved into Sarasota. In the picture you see Susanna and her 2 sons, George and Samuel, and her daughter Alice. In February 1914, the Tonnelier building, named after the brothers from St. Petersburg who owned the building, was finished, and later in the year the Palms Hotel and Theater moved in. The fire of March 1915 destroyed this building. Continuing our walk down Lower Main Street. On the other side of the side street, Miramar Court, was built the Whitaker General Store. The post office was moved there in 1888. The store was vacated in the mid-1890s. In March of 1900, William Whitaker sold the building and lot to S.H. Highsmith. In June of that year, Highsmith, Corsi, and Prime was formed and operated out of the old Whitaker building. By October of the same year, the name was changed to Highsmith, Turner and Prime, and then to Highsmith, Turner and Company. In 1910, George Prime bought into the company again, and the name changed to Highsmith and Prime. You notice Fred Knight opened a drugstore in the building. In June of 1912, the company incorporated into Highsmith, Prime and Company, taking E.J. Bright as a partner, and moved into a new two-story brick building. In 1913, they installed a gas pump in front of their store, and in June 1914, the company split. Prime taking the hardware portion and moving to a different building, and Highsmith and Bright continuing with groceries. Across the street, you will see the three J.L. Iverson buildings. The picture is of the first Iverson two-story building, which opened in January of 1911. The Iversons' wooden building, built in 1886, is best known as the original home of the Sarasota Times, established in 1899. The Times in this building was moved to the alley so that the first and second Iverson blocks could be built. The Times was eventually moved to the first Iverson building. Rose and C.V.S. Wilson are shown in the doorway of Iverson's wooden building, and Rose Wilson with her dog in the upper right. The lower right picture shows the three Iverson concrete block buildings. The first two are 2 stories and the last a single story. Here is the second 2-story Iverson block building, finished in January 1912. The Sarasota Times building in the back of this lot was destroyed in May of 1914. Here is the third Iverson building, a 1-story building. In 1886, Dr. Wallace from the Scott Colony and Sarasota's doctor through the yellow fever crisis in the late 1880s had a house built here. He left after the yellow fever scare, and his wife left after he had established a new practice about a year later. This house was removed in 1914 to make room for Iverson's 50 by 60 foot 1-story store building and 20 by 40 foot warehouse that would be leased to George Prime and his hardware business. In the 1920s, W.H. Haskell bought the old George B. Prime concrete block building on Lower Main Street. In 1926, he hired Thomas Reed Martin to do his magic and turn this 1-story structure into something different, Art Deco slipcover architecture called the Alcazar. The redesign cost $25,000. The Sarasota Herald Tribune article of December 15, 1926, explains, once you pass the arcade-styled entrance, the central tiled corridor leads to one of the most complete and modern restaurant rooms in the city. On either side, an up-to-date shop with remarkable display window case. In the 1940s, it was a nightclub called the Tropical. It changed hands many times through the years. Before the COVID epidemic, it was a Mexican restaurant called Two Señoritas, and now it hosts Melvin's. Almost back to the beginning. We are approaching Palm and Main. Here are some views of Lower Main Street. In the 1960s, under a redevelopment plan, Sarasota destroyed the buildings on the east side of Main Street to put in additional parking. Today you can see how that turned out. Thank you for attending this historic walk.